Hey there, gang. Work continues on the late 60s Hoffner. I plugged the hole left from the screw extraction adventure and then spent forever refining the angles on the tenon so it fits properly in the pocket and produces the correct neck angle. Then I re-drilled the clearance hole, this time for a new screw that will coincidentally hold a strap button in place. Devious, I know. You can watch this while I perfect the neck. Well, here's something. It's a B25. The B25 Mitchell was a medium bomber built by North American Aviation starting in 1941. It served in every theater during World War II, almost ubiquitous. It carried a payload of 2,400 pounds, had a range of about 1,200 miles with a cruising speed of 300 miles an hour. It was exceptionally durable and could withstand a huge amount of damage. A famous example from the 321st Bomb Group was nicknamed Patches because they painted all of the flak holes that it sustained with this bright yellow primer paint, and they just kept adding them as it got more and more hits. By the end of the war, it had flown more than 300 missions and it had been belly landed 6 times. It was just a sea of yellow. The airframe was so distorted from battle damage that to fly it straight and level required 8 degrees of left aileron and 6 degrees of right rudder. So it was practically flying sideways through the sky. I got my notes mixed up. This is a B25 Gibson, part of a range of sort of intermediate level guitars in production from the early 60s through the late 70s. We can date this one pretty close without even checking the serial number because it has a plastic bridge. Yes, indeed. An idea which hasn't been revived. It only lasted about 2 years, like 1962 into maybe 1964. It is injection molded plastic. It's not solid either. It's hollow. It's got some strengthening lines, like sprue, and areas for the bolts that hold it in place. And then of course you got 2 other bolts for the adjustable saddle, which in this case is one of the ceramic ones. Does the rosewood sound better than the plastic? Depends on your perspective, I guess. I think the adjustable ceramic saddle plays probably the biggest part in the whole sound picture. A few years later, these would be replaced with rosewood saddles. Basically, they sound distinctive. You know, if you swap out all of those parts, they will sound very different. And you know, a lot of classic records were made with 1960s Gibsons. So they do some things very well. This guy sustained some damage. And like its Air Corps brethren, it returned to base and lives to play again. Still reasonably functional. The headstock didn't break entirely off, which means we have what a doctor might call a green stick fracture. It doesn't go all the way through, it's a partial break. It would be good to put some glue in there though. We don't want to leave it for too long. It's interesting that it didn't break and follow a grain line. It went right across them. On the front side there's a little lacquer missing. It runs right up to the tuner bushing. I remove the tuners to get better access. These delightful old double-line Clouson Deluxe. If you find yourself playing around with one of these headstocks, just recognize that at least one and possibly many of the bushings are liable to be loose in their holes. And if you upend the guitar in any way, they will go rolling around on the floor and find a hiding space and take up an hour of your day. So it's best to either wrap something around these like a rubber band or something, or remove them for the duration because they're not that tight in their holes. I'll also remove the truss rod cover because I want a nice flat plane against which I can clamp. Be careful with these. They tend to be very brittle at this point. They also tend to crack through the screw holes, so just be careful. There's still paint on the truss rod nut. This is a little comical. Someone has drilled a hole directly through the serial number, probably to affix a strap button, cowboy style. Remember, for a couple of decades there it was quite fashionable to hang your guitar over your shoulder from a very thin strap that attached right to the headstock. You can see the original color here It was much more of a cherry. Gotta be careful how much pressure we put into this, but I have to open that crack up enough to get the glue in there. This should be a very strong repair when we're done, because this has got a lot of surface area. Nice diagonal. It's going to go back together very cleanly too. Clamping pads, these are cork backed. Got one for the face, and this one for the back has got a little recess which I've carved out that will accommodate the curve into the shaft of the neck here. So there should be a place where I can find that will press down sufficiently. I won't be creating a big divot in the back of the neck either because of that relief cut. What kind of glue do we use? I'm using Tight Bond. I don't think it matters that much for this case. We don't ever want to take it apart. Tight Bond is sufficiently strong. It's got a good long working history at this point too. We know that it stays intact over decades. You could use hide glue. It might be difficult to get it in there and clamped up in the time that you have allotted to you. You could use fish glue, you could use epoxy, you could use various other adhesives. I wouldn't use white classroom style glue. I'm pushing in with half the bristles of the brush, getting it right down in there. The other thing is I'm going to be finishing this off with thin cyanoacrylate too, which will wick in deeper even in those areas that the glue doesn't go in. Yeah, I have a big lake of glue on there, but I'm looking for penetration. Penetration being paramount. We're getting good squeeze out. One other interesting little tidbit about the B25 Mitchell was that it was an exceptionally noisy airplane to fly. Loud, like punishingly loud. Something about the engine fairings and their design pushed all of that exhaust and unmuffled noise from those 1300 horsepower motors right back at the pilot and the aircrew. So a lot of them suffered hearing loss if they made it through their whole tour. Well, that's fun. There's an impression in the cork of the truss rod cavity. I'm going to do a super glue fill, but first I'm going to darken the exposed mahogany with this marker. This is a Winsor & Newton Pro Marker in XB Black, which matches pretty well. This will make things less evident. It's easier to do the touch-up on the color before the super glue goes on. This is Glue Boost Fill and Finish, which is a very thin viscosity super glue cyanoacrylate designed for repairing lacquer. Not all cyanoacrylate glues do well in sticking to old lacquer like this. You can see I've overfilled because this is going to shrink back a little bit. I'm not going to use an accelerator on this. I'm going to let it do its thing and cure naturally. While it hardens, I'll work on the frets and polish and polish and polish. Here's a razor blade. It's got two pieces of Scotch tape on either side, which act as a little depth gauge. And with light strokes, try not to bend it too much to reach the surface, otherwise you're going to cause a divot. And try different angles every once in a while, because it's possible to sort of scrape ruts in that are not unlike a gravel road or something, where if a car bumps across the surface every time the next car comes along, it makes the ruts deeper. So vary your angle of attack. This is 1200 grit on a little flat block. And I'll use some micro mesh pads. The back of the headstock receives the same treatment. I'm going to put the tuner bushings back in to prevent them from falling out. Just going to put a little daub of yellow woodworking glue on them. This will not prevent them from being removed again in the future, but it will prevent them from falling out randomly. Let's talk about this pickguard for a second, because it's kind of unusual. Rather than being sliced from a big piece of celluloid, this was actually poured into a mold. I don't exactly know what kind of plastic it is, but you can see there's a base color, and then a few drops of some kind of shading agent was dropped in there and then stirred around with a stir stick to give you this swoopy kind of colored effect. Very different from, the usual tortoise. It's much, much thicker than your standard guards of, say, the 1950s. I'm guessing it's almost 1/8 of an inch thick. I suppose I could measure it. Yeah, it's about 3/32 of an inch thick. The edges in some places are loose, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, because you can also see there's an outline where it shrunk very considerably from its original dimensions. And had it adhered really well, it probably would have torn up the soundboard in some terrible ways. So that's just kind of fun. I think they're kind of cool. You see Harmony used quite a number of these as well. Not quite as thick. But I'd like to know a little bit more about that process, who was making them and what they were making them from. Now with some string tension on, I can finally see what the setup is like. We have 8/64 on the bass side and a little over 5 on the treble. And I expect there's a bit too much relief. There is. So let's crank the truss rod. This pocket is unusually shallow. Man, that's really tight. Okay. Okay, that feels like 8 or 9 thousandths. Let's see if I can get a little bit more out of it. 7 thousandths, I don't mind. Action is now 7 on the bass side, 5 on the treble. I'm going to lower the bass side a bit. I've reduced the string tension because these little studs here are going into brass inserts through the soundboard. The thing is, this saddle is leaning forward considerably. Let's see what that does. I guess we can look inside. You can see all the hardware associated with the bridge and the saddle. And you can also see the very thick bridge plate, which is a 3-ply laminated thing. You can also see, which is very typical of these, that the outer layer of that bridge plate flaked right off when it was drilled. The ball ends of the strings have also done some damage, but in these you'll often find that it doesn't matter too much because they're only now sinking into the level of a standard Martin bridge plate. These things are like 160 thousandths thick. And on the outside, even with the thinner profile of these bridges, the wound portion of the string is coming nowhere near the back of the saddle. Okay, so we wind up with an action of just under 6/64 on the bass side and about 4.5 on the treble. Good action for a strummy guitar like this. I've got 11 to 52s on here, just to be on the conservative side. And the one thing I don't like about these is the adjustable screws. They end up feeling sharp no matter what you do to them. They're always kind of digging into my palm. But beyond that, it is, kind of what you expect a B25 to be like. Returning to the Hoffner, I glued it up, got it clamped, And I didn't film it because I used hide glue, and boy was that nerve-wracking. That was at the very limit of my abilities. But it's together. Hooray! I need to make some support spacers to fill the gap between the fingerboard extension and the top there. I'll make 2 of them, one for either side. It'll be much easier to fit that way, and they'll be tapered, obviously. I want these to fit nicely and not exert too much pressure on the extension. These are kind of important because they're the main contact between the end of the fingerboard and the body. Without these, we've got more of a propensity for things to fold up. They're kind of structural. Let's pop this little fret back in place. Before I go any further, I'm going to knock the ends of the frets off here because they've been annoying me for some time. They're quite sharp. While various things cure, I'm going to start working on the pickguard. This is a real interesting thing. Finding an original pickguard for this model, impossible apparently. However, there is this one, which is from a different model, without pickups. And it looks otherwise the same. Lining it up here, I'm going to have to mark out some areas for the cutouts. This one I think originally got supported by the bridge itself. There's a little screw there, which unfortunately is not going to function in its current state, so we're going to have to cut that out, which will be okay. It actually lines up pretty well with the cutout. So there's also this gold bracket. Looking at this, where the hole in this pickguard is for a screw does not line up with the original hole, so we will have to drill another one, and yeah, likely shorten this as well. That seems to be freshly plated, which is a shame, but sometimes these things happen. Also, that doesn't line up all that well. So there may be some bending involved too. Having a clear pickguard makes it easy to mark out the cutouts. I can just use some tape. I think a 3/8 inch diameter will work well. Does not line up. Not at all. I mean, I can try and bend it somewhere close. I wrestled with it using brute force to get it where it needed to be. I'm just taping up the fretboard here because this thing needs a level and crown. And I believe that at least some of these frets have been out of the guitar at some point. Silly me. I want to straighten this neck as much as possible before I level the frets. There's a bit of a gap there. Let's see how the truss rod does. Oh, I can see that that is very loose. We'll see what that does. Now the surface of the fretboard is good and straight. The fret heights were all over the place, very inconsistent, and this would not have been playable. I sanded in a little bit of fall away, which is probably pretty important in an arch top with a floating extension like this. Some recrowning, and some polishing. I think it's important to note that German precision did not really extend to Hoffner's fretting. Some of these spacings are, what's the German word for fanciful? It turns out these pickups are deep enough that there's enough adjustment room to bring them up to where they need to be for the bridge pickup. Here's an issue that sometimes happens. The fretboard radius on this is super tight. It's 7 1/4 inches, like a vintage Fender. Nice for playing bar chords, but when you pair that with the standard Gibson ABR bridge, a thing happens, because the preset radius on that is much larger. It's 12 inches. And if we set the action where we'd like it for the outside strings, which is how we usually do it, the inner strings end up much closer to the frets. Too close, in fact. The action here is 4/64 on the high E. On the G and D, it's down around 2.5, and they won't play clean. So you either raise the action to the point where it's no fun, or you have to modify the bridge. And I'm going to take a fret file and work on the top two strings and groove those saddles more deeply to get us into playability. I'm also trying to zhuzh the string spacing slightly closer together by angling the file. Alright, that's enough of that for a while. Still have a few drop fills I have to wait on before I can level and buff out, but I'm reasonably satisfied. You know, the neck joint is accomplished. I've said it before, these old Hoffners, even in this case, the very best of them seem to be, well, they have endemic issues that make it really frustrating to work on them. People have fond associations. But remember, the Beatles got rid of theirs as soon as they could afford something different. I mentioned that the pickup covers had been re-gilded. These staple pickups have a widespread issue that keeps popping up more and more every year. Deep inside them, where the coil wire connects to the bobbin, they used a specific kind of flux, which, with the solder, it basically makes the solder stick to things a little easier. But over time, this variety corrodes terribly. It's almost like it's acidic. And it causes a dead short, so the pickups die. A lot of them are failing. I think at the end of the day, you'd better have some deep emotional connection with a specific Hoffner to make it worthwhile. A lot of repair people I know really sigh heavily when one of these comes through the door, and a lot of people just say, you know, it might not be worth it. And in this case, because of its rarity, yeah, I hope it's worth it. It's an attractive guitar, that's for sure.